How long can you fight deniers? How long can you fight cover-ups?
There was an older gentleman in Phoenix, and they lied to him, told him they'd give him a loan modification. Instead, they foreclosed. They showed up to take his house. He got a gun out and said, you know, I'm old and I don't care anymore. And he wouldn't put the gun down, so the police shot him and killed him.
Killed him. And I've seen people also, I've seen examples of the suicide in the last 2 years where they say, if you're going to take this property, it's been my family 8 generations,
right.
This ranch, whatever it is, if you're going to take this, then we're going to take ourselves out because we're going to not let you take, we're not going to be alive to see this.
And people say it's not as bad as the Depression because people were jumping out of windows during the Depression. We're there.
Jumping off
people
bridges,
Suicide
Bridge in Philadelphia, this is, they jumped off the bridges.
Yeah, and they're doing it. Like you say, they're killing themselves.
But this is a much quieter, this is a war. And it is a war launched on the American taxpayer by the banks. This is a war launched by Wall Street titans against the American people.
It's absolutely a war.
And it is not being treated or handled as a war. It's not being spoken. The devastating consequences are not, it's quiet. People are not seeing them.
And the government's the one that's subsidizing it, and the government's the one that are propping up the banks and literally knowingly let them steal homes because they feel they're being held hostage by the banks. Because if Bank of America and Wells Fargo and JP Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs all fail, they're afraid we're going to have complete chaos because you're talking about putting the title to 62 million homes.
More than that.
Right. 100 in complete chaos where nobody will know who owns them and nobody knows what the right thing to do is.
But nobody does now.
I know that.
So what are we doing? We're propping up
the banks. It's the lesser of two evils. And so, you know, if it's a choice in our country between helping the homeowner or helping Bank of America, they're going to help Bank of America, and the homeowner suffers. This has the potential to put title to almost every piece of property in the country in question. And if it does, the entire real estate system breaks down. And you have our entire system of real estate fail. And, you know, you're talking now about the real estate brokers, the title companies, the escrow companies, and on and on and on. And you have a complete disaster because you've ruined the entire system of transferring real estate in the United States. I mean, they have ruined the entire system of transferring real estate in the United States. It's estimated that there are 62 million houses where MERS is named as the, quote, nominal beneficiary on the trust deed, and technically all of those loans are improper, they're void, they're illegal, they were fraudulent. The thing that people understand is if the house is sold, that's not the end of the story, it's the beginning. Because they still have to file, if the house is sold at a trustee sale, that's not the end of the story, it's the beginning, because they still, throughout the United States, have to file a lawsuit to get possession.
Right.
And the battle can be fought there.
Right.
And everybody thinks that, oh my God, if my house is sold, that's it, I'm done. Now, sadly, I have depositions in my office where representatives of JP Morgan Chase admitted they hired what they call asset management companies and real estate brokers. And they say, after we foreclose, you go out there with a locksmith, break into the house, and physically force the homeowner to leave. The real estate broker knocks on the door and says, I'm here to take over this house for the bank, and you're going to have to leave, and I'm changing the locks. And by the way, you got a week to get your stuff out of here, we're going to put it out on the street. What is the real estate? He's offered commissions, and I have it in deposition testimony.
What type of individual does this?
Real estate brokers and asset managers who are being paid a lot of money to do it.
By the banks?
By the banks.
And you have an example in your office
I have sworn testimony.
JP Morgan doing this.
They have written policies. They're not ashamed of it. They're arrogant. What I tell everybody is there's only one person in this country that can order anybody to do anything, and that's a judge. Not even Obama can order anybody to do anything.
Part of the problem.
Well, I know. You have to get to a judge that will listen. And that's why it's so important that I teach lawyers the techniques where you get judges to listen, because that's an art. Mm-hmm. And so if you can get a judge to listen, a judge will put a stop to that. They cannot give everybody in this country a fair trial on an unlawful detainer case because the courts would be flooded with them, and it's a physical impossibility. So if anybody has to suffer because the courts can't accommodate the case, it should be the banks and not the homeowners. But the banks own the propaganda. The banks have way more power politically. they can influence whether a judge gets elected, not elected, appointed, or not appointed. If a judge has to choose between Carlos the mailman, who will have absolutely no impact on whether a judge gets reappointed, reelected, or anything else, or choose between the banks, he's going to choose between the banks. Banks own the country. They have bought it. They own it. They own the propaganda. The legislature, they
Robert
own...
Rubin, 1999, you just bought the government to Sandy Wheel.
Yeah, and so they own the legislative branch, they own the executive branch, they don't own the judicial branch, but they own some of it. And that's our last hope, is to decide the case against the banks and make this the bank's problem instead of the homeowner's problem.
Which is what should be happening nationwide.
That's right. That would be justice. But the banks...
It would be a healthy society. It's not just justice.
Right. It would be a healthier society. There's no doubt our society is sick. Thomas Jefferson predicted this. Hamilton predicted it. They all said when the banks can own this country, your children and grandchildren will be paupers.
Right. We are in chaos. We are in chaos.
Absolutely.
And we are a step away from anarchy.
Right. Actually, there is anarchy.
There is anarchy already. Yeah.
The police are not following the law.
The police do not want to deal with it because it's bigger than them and they know it.
Right.
So what's coming is even worse in terms of citizens thinking they're protected.
It's going to happen anyway. It's a question of who's going to stand up and take responsibility and who's going to do it. And
but you have precedent cases.
There's plenty of precedent.
So what is wrong then? Isn't that the doorway for other judges to go through to say we have precedent?
Unfortunately, it's a case-by-case, judge-by-judge basis. That's the way our system works. There are judges now. There's a federal judge in Phoenix that just threw out a whole bunch of cases. So there are judges that are getting proactive, but it's being slowly discovered. In Phoenix, I was just there, that the law firms are literally in on it with the banks. They're not only lawyers. There's the law firm in Phoenix has its own title company, its own trustee company. I mean, they're basically running the show for the banks and splitting the profits. And they are criminal.
Inextricably bound. We cannot even pull this apart.
It's too much money. I mean, this is a symptom of what's going on in our society.
But it's corporate profit over people, corporate profit over environment. And this is where we are as a civilization.
It's corporate profit over everything.
Over everything. And now we've got Soros and Dell buying IndyMac, quickly changing the name to One West. Right. They swooped in, but they turned around and made a secret deal with the government. And they said, okay, we will be in for 20%. You take the 80% insurance on every house under IndyMac. IndyMac was one of the most egregious in the subprime market. So our billionaires, Dell and Soros, only have to put up 20% if the house fails. The homeowner walks away.
The government has agreed.
It's worse than that? How could it be worse than that? What incentive do you have to keep people in their houses?
No. What the government said is, I thought you were talking about this, to the banks.
The FDIC gave them an 80% guarantee on every house.
80 to 95%.
Oh, my God. I thought it was 80-20.
No. So basically what they've told the banks is, you can go foreclose, and if you make a profit, great, you can keep it.
Right.
If you lose money, we will reimburse you between 80 and 95% of what you lose. It's a sliding scale. So to make sure their losses don't get too big, because as they get bigger, they get more and more money. Up to 95%.
Zero incentive to keep people in their houses.
Well, it's even worse than that, because what the banks do is, and this is part of one of the PowerPoints that I have when I do my seminars, is they steal the house, then they tell the government they have a loss, and they lie about that, and they get them to pay the 80 to 95% on top of it, because they make it look like a loss to the FDIC. That's why people ask me.
The books.
I have a whole seminar.
The books.
Yes, of course. I mean, it's part of my seminars. I say it's called "How the Banks Make Money Foreclosing," and I just walk them through it because all the information's there. But if you read the contracts between the FDIC and the banks, that's basically what it says: is you go ahead and foreclose, you make a profit, you keep it. You have any losses? We'll reimburse you between 80 and 95%, and all you have to do to prove you had a loss is submit this paperwork, because we'll trust you. So the bank steals the house, sells it, pretends they have a loss, submits the phony paperwork to the FDIC, and the taxpayer pays them again. So they collect double on the same house.
People take your money out of the banks.
The banks make, an ungodly amount of money and by foreclosing. So why would they do a loan modification? I mean, that's a joke. Why would they try to help a homeowner when they can make these ungodly profits by foreclosing?
Loan modifications did nothing. 5% went through, something to this nature?
No, they didn't really go through. None of them did.
Well, a few people got.
A few people.
A handful.
They have to make it look good.
Well, they didn't even attempt to do that.
Well, they do, because the banks come out and say, we gave 1,000 people a loan modification,
Yeah.
out
of 300
62 million,
Yeah.
out of 300 million or whatever.
It's pretty good.
So they have to give some people a little bit of a break, but it's pathetic, the numbers. I mean, it's not significant at all. And the FDIC went through the roof. They took the unprecedented step. They'd never commented on something on the news or anything ever in their history. And the FDIC came out, when this came out on the internet, and commented on it and squashed it.
How did they squash it?
Well...
Or not how, but what was their angle? How did they frame it?
Their angle is fear and intimidation, but it's a little different than the banks. It's, do you want to be responsible for causing a run on the banks and bringing this country into the next depression by bringing this information
We are
out?
not responsible. Wall Street Titans
I know.
are responsible.
This is what they say, though.
Government complicit with Wall Street Titans are responsible, and any ostensible consequences that we may all have to live through was created clearly by them. They are the criminals.
Absolutely.
The people have been really sold down the river 10 times over.
Right now, the government's position is too big to fail. That's their position, which is...
I'm tired of hearing it.
I know.
I'm tired of hearing too big to fail.
That's their position.
Fail.
Their position is...
I have faith in the people of this country that they can rebuild this country on their own.
I do too, absolutely.
In a crude sense, get the bankers by the balls. I'm sorry to
say
it, but
that's never going to happen.
said.
The banks are going to win. The banks have won.
We just discussed that one solution, pull your money out of Bank of America.
Oh, absolutely.
Pull your money out of Wells Fargo. It takes 9 to 12 minutes to drive into the parking lot and go in and withdraw all your funds.
And put it in a community bank. Yep.
Community banks and credit unions.
Yeah. Yep.
That's the beginning. And
yeah.
I think every American should be looking at that right now. Bank of America, Citicorp, Wells Fargo, sorry.
They would take notice. And there are organizations online that are trying to get people to do that. And they publish, here's a list of local community banks where you can go set up an account online. They even have links. You can do it, right online if you want to, and transfer your funds.
And the community banks in smaller communities are more willing. There's a personal relationship to give you some loans, to get you through some times, to get things going.
Right.
City National here in California has behaved responsibly. They can do loans. They never got involved in this crisis. They didn't trade in these dangerous securitized properties.
There's a lot of banks out there.
There's a lot of banks out there. And I think the onus is on each person in America. We cannot wait for the government. The government is doing absolutely zero about this.
Right. My community bank, you can go to any ATM machine in the world, and
Exactly.
they pay the fees.
They pay the fees.
That's the problem, because people aren't going to pay attention until they have to. And they're not going to have to until there's a crisis.
The only time people get it is when they don't have access to food, water, or their dollar, their precious dollar.
Right.
This is what it's going to take.
It's what it's going to take.
And I think the onus is on each person in America. We cannot wait for the government. The government is doing absolutely zero about this.
Right.
I'm sorry. I've tweeted. I've called Obama out. Whether I have a right as an everyday citizen to call out our president, I don't do that with arrogance. I do it with humility. How can he allow millions of children and parents to be put out of their homes? That's what's going to happen here. And that's what is happening and will happen for the next 2 years.
It's already happened.
He can live down a lot of things in his presidency years later, but he's not going to live that down.
He can't do anything.
But he needs to step forward.
You're right.
He cannot ignore this.
You're right. We need a leader. We need a leader who will inspire the people, who will step forward and do the right thing.
I love Bank of America's recent campaign they launched is that they're now going to help you with your retirement.
Yeah.
After this.
Right. First they steal your house, now they're going to steal your retirement.
Steal your house. Now we're going to help you with retirement. Yeah, they're going to steal that too.
Yeah.